Hey, how's it going? This is Wilsfer with Abysmal Hymns, and I have my friend, author Shahryar Sadree with me, and he has written three books he has out. His newest being Down in a Hole. And the overarching themes of his books tend to be about the connection of the spirit, mind, and body. And his newest one focuses on, not how we think, but or not what we think, but how we think. And so, would you like to just kind of briefly explain that concept?
I think the one thing that you nailed on the spot is the order of the human being. You know, most people, well, most people, this is what we've been taught. Body, mind, and spirit. Body's always first, spirit's always last. You ever notice that?
Right, for sure.
Yeah, well, you're
Which
one of
took
the
me a
few.
little bit to like practice thinking it the other way.
Right, right, and that's because it's programmed, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to overwrite a program, and that's what makes it difficult. It's like changing a bad habit, you know. But it's very powerful stuff, and we seem to take it for granted. But I'm kind of elated that I'm not the only one that thinks this way. So,
Right,
um,
right, for sure. And so when it comes to the thinking part, which I know as a life coach that's an important thing that you're trying to reprogram the thinking, and there's the old saying that you can't think your way into better acting, you have to act your way into better thinking. And how do you see that reflected in what you're doing?
oh, like a mirror, you know, it's very, very, very obvious, because you can't fix a problem without acknowledging it that there is a problem, and the mind works like that. It doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's fabricated, and it's very easy to trick the mind. So that's a good thing if you're trying to look for a life hack. That's the best one right there, because you can literally think your way into a better way of life, because everything starts with a thought, right? The process starts with a thought, and then it turns into an action, you know. Um, like, for example, I would never get up and go cook food if I wasn't hungry. The thought pops into the head, hey, I want to go make a sandwich. And next thing you know, you're in the kitchen making one. Um, Everything pretty much works in that way. The only problem is, we have this visual thing, like, when we're always looking at our bank account, right? So it's like when you want to do something, you're like, oh, I didn't get paid till, you know, Friday, or I can't afford it. Or, you say things to yourself like money doesn't grow on trees, which in fact it does, you know, and there's a lot of those barriers that we put up ourselves, so it's like we're in kind of a self-concocted prison by the way that we think. And it's really easy to reverse. Well, I can't say it's easy. It's a simple concept, but it's very difficult if you're not on it. But as a musician, I didn't, come out of the womb learning, knowing how to play my instrument. It took me years of practice and training, and more practice and more training and so on. And here I am at 57. I'm able to do things that I couldn't do when I first picked up the instrument. It took a lot of work. Well, thinking is the next. It's the same concept. It applies to thinking when you're trying to um, change your life. You can't use the same program that created the situation that you're in. I think Einstein said that. You got to use a different mindset for solution than you did the problem. And that opens up another thing that goes more into the spirit side. If you want to look at that, the universal laws that I'm sure you're familiar with, it's they're always working in the background. So, you know, there's there's not that many universal laws. I mean, most of them kind of like work within themselves, and different ones work with different, but they all interlock. So it's like it's all they all come together through the universal law of oneness, that everything is part of something else, you know. But these aren't skills. This isn't knowledge that we're taught in schools. If we did this and you teach kids as they're growing up this type of occulted knowledge, they grow up to become masters and what would become of the ruling class, right?
Right. And it seems too that, one of the biggest things is, I guess, how all thought is, creative, and the focus on how what we think is what we attract into our lives, um, is definitely not something that's taught in school.
Well,
Um,
no, that kind of power could take down empires, man. That, you know what I'm saying?
right. And it's
It's
kind of like I've told my daughter, school is the game you play to show them that you can play the game. Uh,
right.
so I think that's, if people lean too much on that, or think that they are their degrees or whatever, all that is that's the path that you've been approved to take. So yes, I can see that. And what would you say, from your experience, are the worst traps that people fall into when it comes to thinking?
Well, pretty much just what you said, it's like the first thing they ask you is what's your credentials, You want to be a coach? What qualifies you as being one? I mean, that's a good question, but just because somebody didn't go to a brick and mortar school, to get the education, that's not the only place you can get education. As a matter of fact, it's more tricky to get education from a brick and mortar because you don't know if it's education or you're being indoctrinated, because again, they don't teach this kind of stuff, the powerful stuff. It's like think about it like healthy foods, right? When you're going through the grocery store, there's like tons and tons, shelves, endless shelves of just garbage that people shovel into their mouths and into their bodies, thinking that they're buying food or they're consuming food, when in reality what they're doing is they're consuming poison. The real food is where you're not going to see it. It's usually on the bottom shelf where people don't look, or it's behind something, or it's hard to find. You really have to dig. And then that's another thing. You want to try to find something that's healthy, it's going to cost you more. But in this situation, education that is actually conducive to a better quality of life is free. You don't pay for it. You have to dig for it. It's there, but it's not like you can't just throw it into the Google search engine and expect it to come up as truth because, you know, all of these mainstream avenues are designed to keep that knowledge from you. And it's only the ones that really dig for it are the ones that are qualified and are uh, have earned the um, the privilege of gaining access to it. Because let's face it, man, if you're not ready for this stuff, you're going to look at it and go, oh, this is complete and utter BS, man. Nobody's going to believe this stuff. You got to be out of your mind. And then again, that's exactly where you need to be. You need to be out of your mind and into your spirit because the spirit knows everything. There's nothing that it doesn't know, you know. And the afterlife, as a spirit, we're perfect in every way, and as a human form, not so much, you know. So
Right. And I think it's
I,
interesting that the only time in, 'cause I'm a psychology major, so the only time that you see spiritual stuff getting approved by the psychology machine is when they send people to 12-step programs, and then that becomes more of an emphasis. And I mean, people like Freud and Jung were both occultists, so it's
Mhm.
not surprising that there's that link. But I think that one thing is people don't have to get to that place where they find themselves and drink coffee from a styrofoam cup because they're homeless, to kind of find the desperation to get to that place. I guess that everybody has a different starting point. So it is interesting how, and as you were talking, I was thinking about in the digging deeper part, how it seems like the trend of, and you brought up Google, but how everything's becoming more automated with AI, and made me think, is that supposed to be circumventing the digging process? So it's even stopping that exploration before it begins to just hand in you a prepackaged answer.
Right, right. And like you mentioned Freud, um, there was what's his name? Huxley? I forget his first
Yeah,
name.
Natalie Berkeley, Doors of Perception.
Yeah, yeah. So so he stumbled onto this knowledge like I did. It's just like, he never learned this stuff, but he learned this the Hermetic teachings. He fell into it, and then he started digging deeper to the point where, these the elite class, or the Illuminati, or whatever you want to call them, the Freemasons, they approached him because they saw that, hey, this guy's got the knowledge. He was able to capture it without coming in through these channels, and he was, inducted. They took him in as one of their own because it's like, this guy, it enlightenment isn't for everybody, because let's face it, man, there's a lot of non-player characters, the NPCs. There's a lot of those out there, and I know that, at one point I remember them talking about creating a human being inside of a lab, so human cloning technology has been around forever. So not everybody that you communicate with has that ability to tap into the soul. You know, it's sometimes they're these artificial life forms, and that's funny because, it's, speaking about AI, that's the ultimate goal, is to take a human spirit and put it into a machine. That's the whole concept behind transhumanism, you know, that nobody likes to talk about. I mean, not in the open public anyway, not yet. I imagine somewhere down the road when humans are completely a thing of the past, that might be a conversation for something then. It's like, how do we come to this? How do we get here? And of course, it's the soul that does that. That's the concept of soul searching. You really have to be in tune with that for you to have access to the life mastery tools that I like to call them, and then things start to begin to make sense. Universal laws, like what is that? It's like, well, gravity for one, physics, you know, these are laws that have a lot to do with the working in harmony with these universal laws. I mean, how else is it going to be possible for like a 747 weighed down, weighs over 1 million pounds? How do you make that fly? How does it take off? There's a science to it. Same thing with like a ship, like a tanker or a cruise ship or something massive that weighs millions and millions of tons. You know, um, how do you get something like that to float across an ocean? You take a rock and throw it in, and the size of a freaking pebble, and you throw it into the water and it sinks to the bottom. It doesn't float, you know? So how are these things made possible? If you start paying attention, or if you start looking at those things, because most people, they don't think in that realm, And here's one for you. Look at water, for example, right? I mean, water is one of those things that where it's going to find a way to move. You can't contain it. It doesn't just stay put unless it's in a bowl, something that it can't move out of, you know. But you put flowing water, moving water, you put a barricade in front of it, it's going to find a way to go under it, around it, through it, over it, it's going to find its way, and it doesn't need anybody's help, right? It uses the laws of physics and gravity to move. And so, we start thinking about the human form. I mean, the body is made mostly of water. So, and the same goes true. It's like when it's in solid form, right? It's ice. But you take that ice, you put it on a stove, you're gonna heat the vibrational frequency changes to liquid, and it goes from solid to liquid. Put the liquid in a pot, heat it back up, and it turns to steam. Imagine that. Put a glass over that, and you can capture it, and that steam hits the glass and turns back to water. So we have the ability to transmute ourselves if that's our desire. You find yourself in a bad situation, you can easily find the solution if you're looking for it, not in the direction of the problem, but the opposite direction, because problem and solution are two sides of the same coin, right? So you can't have heads and tails, it's heads or tails. So you got to pick one. If you're focused on the problem, then the solution is in your rear view. You want to put the problem in your rear view, then you got to turn your focus and put it on the solution, and everything works. It's simple, but what makes it really difficult goes back to the question you asked earlier, which was, what's the biggest, you know, hurdle in all of this? And it falls back onto thinking, your mindset. That's the key. It's the beginning and the end of everything.
And do you see like intention as being the kind of bullseye of the thinking or like the motor to the thinking?
Come again?
Like the thought of intention, like, there's always think of like magic being like focused intention. Um, so would the intention be more of the drive behind the thinking, or is that the intention is the bullseye that people have to get to?
I, I think it could work in different ways. I mean, intent is like, that's important. That's a powerful piece of that, that what you need. It's one of those factors that it helps a lot if your intention is to do something. Then again, that intent can go sideways. They say that roads to hell are paved with good intent. So you have to be, uh, very aware of these things. And so it goes back to awakening. Most people are in a complete state of inanimate animate or no unconscious animation. That's the term I like to use, because I mean we're moving. I mean, but a lot of people aren't thinking in what direction they're going. I think Bob Proctor, he's one of my life coaches, if you will. Um, I get a lot from this guy, and because he makes a lot of sense. He's like, if you want to change your ways of thinking, you got to change the paradigm, and that's like the blueprint of everything. We come in here and we're like, well, that'll never happen, or that'll never change, or we say these things to ourselves, but not realizing that the words that we're choosing are basically creating the path for our experiences in life. Those that uh, live, and I say live, and because most of us are in survival mode, right? And to truly live, you got to be able to break outside of that mold, or outside of the four corners of your own belief structures, thinking that this is all there is. And if you're trying to change your ways of thinking, holding on to that paradigm, nothing's going to change, because you got to change the blueprint first, and that does take intent. So you don't just do it accidentally, you do it purposely. Now sometimes you might stumble upon something accidentally, and that'll grab your interest and go, "Ooh, that was weird. What just happened there?" But you really have to be in tune, like sharply in tune to your surroundings and what's going on. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people just aren't there. And so that's the block that they have. So I mean, but if they're having problems, but their desire is to change, then you can approach somebody like you or me that has the ideas and has the pathway and has seen it working in real time and has tested these theories, and they're not theories anymore. They become fact once, you show evidence that this is the way it is, then it's not a theory anymore, right?
Right, right. And I would say too that, with the intent and the focus of thought and what you were saying earlier about the being awake enough to see the pattern, um, it would seem that, distraction is a big problem in today's world.
Oh
And
yeah.
I remember I was watching a documentary on depression and medication for depression, and they were talking
Hmm.
about how, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even 70s, people would just gather around the TV and watch news once a day. But now we have the news with us 24 hours a day, and
Don't
the
stop, man.
compulsion to be plugged into that is, I think it's addictive as drugs. So is that a common problem that you're seeing? That is people in a distracted and non-focused state?
Oh yeah. That's I mean, it's very obvious, really. I mean, brother, you've watched these commercials for depression drugs, right? It's like if this, take this drug, and and then they say the side effects. Well, the side effects to depression drugs are what? Suicidal thoughts and more depression. It's like, okay, well, that could become problematic. So, I mean, look how the mainstream tackles it. Instead of saying, well, don't take this crap, it's not good for you, right? They tell you, don't stop taking it. If you got suicidal thoughts, take this other medication with it, and that'll fix the problem. See, we're looking for a quick fix. And I think that's one of the biggest things is human beings are lazy, man. We've got to the point where we're not forging for shit anymore. We're like looking at the quickest, fastest, easiest method, and it's just not there. It's the easiest way to fall into a trap, you know, is to just be completely oblivious to what's going on around you. My first thought when I see when I saw that, that they come by with the solution to depression by taking drugs. Well, if the drugs are going to work, that's one thing. But if the drugs are causing more depression and suicidal tendencies, and it's taking you in the complete opposite direction, taking more drugs with that give you the same outcome, to me just doesn't make sense. There's no sense involved in it. And they say common sense just isn't common anymore. It's because we've been basically indoctrinated outside of that. I mean, early humans had that because if they didn't, you step outside of a cave, you get eaten by something. You really needed your wits if you wanted to go out into the public. And it's pretty much the same here. You walk into a bad neighborhood unaware, something bad could happen to you. So it all comes down to that. You really have to tune yourself to your environment. And that's another thing. We're not taught these things. We live in a sea of energy, man, and we're energy beings trying to navigate that environment. And so if you don't understand how things work or what you've got to work with or your own power, so easily people give it up. They go on Facebook and they talk about what a bad day they're having, or in these 12-step rooms, you get these people that are struggling, they come in and they they hijack the meeting, and instead of listening to solutions, they're compounding their problems by telling their story of having problems, right? It, the,
Right, right. And one thing in my experience with that it comes down, and even in some of the 12-step literature, kind of touches on what you were talking about earlier, where it says, when you focus on the solution increases. But when you focus on the problem increases. I think the thing is, people are just so identified with their problem till that's become their identity.
yeah, I know they wear it like a badge of honor. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, the last thing I want to do is compound my problems. I don't focus on that. The first thing that happens when a problem hits me is I look, okay, what's my next move? That's the first question that goes through my head when I encounter a problem. The first thing that goes into my head is like, what's my next move? Because I'm not taking a step in that direction anymore. In other words, I've turned the problem off for a second. Now my mind is shifting to solutions, right? And so if here's my thinking, if you're always concerned about plan B, plan C, plan D before you even gave plan a honest shot, right? You're really opening the door for that next problem. That's why speculation to me is it's counterproductive thinking, to think, well, this can go wrong and that can go wrong and this, and I mean, we all have friends and you and I both have somebody we know that thinks that way, and it's like when you're constantly thinking about what could go wrong, you're setting the stage for that to happen. So plan B, plan C, plan D isn't even going to work because if you got anything you put behind that, you know, plan A, until plan A comes to its own organic uh, uh, fruition, it comes and you realize that, well, plan A's it just hit a brick wall, now what, you know? So when I get to that point and I'm thinking, okay, what's my next move? All of a sudden, the solution will appear out of nowhere, almost as if it came out of a portal or like a gateway or something, or a stargate, and it just develops almost like a stepping stone coming out of the water, you know. Okay, well, there's an option, you know. Is it the best option? Not exactly what I had in mind, but it's better than the stone I'm standing on right now that's sinking, So you stand on that next one. And that next stepping stone could be anything, man. It could be a relationship, it could be a job, it could be, you know, uh, whatever, man. Another product, you're trying to build for your business and you can't come up with something, and you know, it's it's not magic. It works by way of law, universal law. And that's something, again, we're never taught these things in school, you know, life mastery and enlightenment isn't for everybody. It's only for those that are seeking a better life for themselves. Because here's the thing, man. Everybody dies, right? I can't name one person in the history of this planet that has lived forever. You know what I'm saying? These vehicles of flesh and bone. That's what I refer to them as. Is the body. It's just nothing more than a vehicle. But these vehicles are perishable. They have a shelf life. The spirit doesn't. The spirit can jump from one dimension to another, just like it can jump from one body to another. It has the ability to do that, but we don't give it the kind of um, the power that it truly has when we're in it. So what do? We go an entire lifetime thinking that this is all there is. And then on our deathbed, we think about all the things that we didn't get to do, right? And living is on the top of that list for probably the majority of the people that come here and go, or that came here and left prematurely, to their own volition. Because let's face it, man, life is treacherous, man. It's not this playground isn't an easy place to you know to be in, let alone to succeed in. If you want success, it requires strategy. Now you got to really use your thinker for what it was designed for. And again, it goes back to mindset. Not everybody's ready for that. So
Cool. Yeah, I think that, that's part of it is that I think why things like medication are so popular because it's easy fix and they're not going to prescribe hard work on and self-reflection and exercise and those types of things that take the discipline to get there. So that's I guess where you're kind of talking about it's not for everybody because there is a lot of even digging into yourself is work and so I definitely appreciate that perspective and look forward to hearing more from it. We're about out of time, but we'll have to get you back on and dig deeper into this. I'm going to put a link in the description for your book Down in a Hole and appreciate the time.
It's great talking with you, man. This is a breath of fresh air for me, man. I'm typically it when I start talking this stuff, they're looking at me like, you know, I belong in a padded room or some shit, you know. It's sad, but it's I wish more people knew about this because
Well, I mean,
it's a really
that's what we're just going to try to do is spread the word. So we'll
that's it, man. That's
have to
it.
reconvene and get back on it. But thanks for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll have you back on.
Sounds great, man. Sounds great.